Welcome to TESO Consulting Group's DEI podcast series, Why Is It So Hard? Shining Through the Shadow of Resistance. I'm Dr. Tonya Breland.
And I am Erika Lee.
Welcome back.
Welcome back, everybody.
I'm Tonya.
And I'm Erika. And this is our podcast, Why Is It So Hard? Shining Through the Shadows of Resistance. And in our podcast series, as many of you know, we discuss issues that prevent us from being socially just and free. And the goal here is to disrupt the status quo of racial inequality and inequity in systems. And each episode challenges us and you also to just be the change that we want to see.
Yeah, so today's topic, race to the classroom.
Race to the classroom.
So, as a kid, I used to love racing my siblings or my cousins. In high school, I actually ran track.
That's awesome.
I wanted to be a sprinter, but in those days I was very thin, so sprinters were not thin.
No.
I could probably be a sprinter now.
But not that.
But, I really enjoyed a really good race.
Yeah.
Especially when I could win. And I even remember when I was teaching fourth grade years ago, I had, some students in the classroom. We were outside for something. And I decided that I was going to race the students. And they're like, "Oh, Miss Breland, I had no idea you could run." It was a lot of fun. But that's not the kind of race we're talking about.
We are not talking about that race
No,
today.
what are we talking about?
We're really talking about the ban on, conversations around race and ethnicity that's happening, particularly in Florida, but it's happening in other spaces as well.
It is.
Yeah.
This, I'll tell you, every time I see something on the news or in social media that reinforces, what I see as racism, just outright blatant racism, I'm so disappointed.
I know.
I'm so disappointed.
Just hurt.
Yeah, that we have come so far as a country, and yet we have not come far enough.
Yeah, I am still, it still blows me away that a state can say, a governor can say, and then there be people, other policymakers, other lawmakers that say, yeah, don't talk about that. Yeah. Don't talk about slavery. Don't talk about the civil rights movement. Don't talk about, racism. Don't talk about these things.
Right.
I cannot believe that someone would co-sign on just sort of trying to wash the history away.
Yeah. I mean, here's the thing, anything that we can't talk about, we can't heal.
Yep.
So like if we think about our personal relationships. So I've been married for 33 years. You've been married for
21.
And when we think about like our relationships with our spouses, can you imagine what our relationships would be if we never talked about the things that were a problem or that were a challenge?
It would be a problem. It would be a challenge. And I know that because we tried it, right?
Yeah,
so
right?
Early on, I could not imagine arguing with this man,
right.
Or addressing because I love him, right? I just married him and then it's like, okay, well, maybe it's not that. Maybe we don't have to talk about that issue. Right. Maybe we don't have to talk about it.
Right.
And
after, it's going to go away.
Because it's going to go away.
Not.
Because we're wonderful. We're both wonderful people and we love each other. And it just got worse.
It would get worse.
And you have to talk about it. You have to talk about it.
You do have to talk about it.
You do.
Because when you sweep it under the rug or when you pretend like it doesn't exist, it just blows up.
That's right. It
inevitably blows up. It's going to come out some kind of way.
In some way.
I hear people talking about like, something is going, like you're leaking.
Yeah.
if you're not addressing something,
Yes.
or you're bleeding all over the place,
Yeah.
what they're really talking about is when you don't address an ill or a problem, in your
Yeah.
relationships, then it's going to come out in some way or another that
Yeah.
this is still an unresolved problem,
That's right.
or an unresolved conflict, or area that needs to be improved upon, or whatever it is. It does not ever get better.
It doesn't. It doesn't. And the way that it comes up in, your the challenge is over here, but the it comes out, it leaks, it bleeds over here.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And so we got to fix that and then get to the root of like what actually really happened, and it just creates a big mess, right? So,
Yeah, absolutely.
and I think that's really what we're experiencing
Right.
now
So
in
if
this
that doesn't
space.
work in our personal relationships, why in the world do we think if we can avoid these
I
topics
know.
in other spaces, why do we think that's going to work?
It's so
I mean,
funny.
we don't think that.
You would think that, we would let history be our guide, right? So in 1992, when, we all, those of us who were alive, witnessed the heartbreaking explosion of the riots, the LA riots after the Rodney King verdict. But since then there have been several documentaries that have really sort of pulled back layers of what was happening in Los Angeles with Black people and what was happening, in terms of the relationship between well, it wasn't Rodney King. It really was the verdict. It was
Yeah.
the verdict, right? And so of those who really just beat him up, those
Yeah.
cops, and
Yeah.
they were found not guilty, and then then we had the riots, and since then we've had documentary and information after information that really pulled back the layers of these things that just kept happening because it was never addressed. It was never resolved. It never resolved the relationship between the law enforcement and the African American population, right?
Right.
And
Right.
so, one hurt after another, after another, after another, and then it just erupted,
Right.
right?
Right.
So history shows us that that doesn't work.
Right.
Not addressing it doesn't work.
Right. Right. And the truth is, every child deserves to see themselves in the
That's
curriculum.
right.
They do.
That's right.
I mean, we're longtime educators. We know what it is to teach. We've
Yeah.
been in a state that has promoted ethnic studies, that has been a champion for diversity, equity,
Yeah.
and inclusion. And so we understand the freedom that comes along with that. But I would be mortified if, as an educator, somebody tried to tie my hands
Yeah.
and say, "You can't teach that."
Yeah. Yeah.
That would just,
I can't imagine. And you're right. I mean, we are fortunate to be in a state that really does promote the teaching of history,
yes.
right,
And history's not pretty.
that's right. It's not
It's
pretty.
not pretty.
That's
And,
right.
just like when we have problems in our personal relationships, those problems are not pretty at all, whatever they are. But if we pretend like they don't exist, or we try to lie and say that they never happened, we find ourselves in a really awful place.
Yeah.
Same thing happens in society.
Then what do you say then for people who say, when you do teach about that, when you do teach about, let's say, the civil rights, when you do teach about Jim Crow, or when you do teach about, the Ku Klux Klan, or when you teach about, sort of the terrorism that Black people experience, that white kids feel bad. Like, what do you say to that? Because that's often the answer for,
Yes.
sort of
We
pulling this
we
history.
don't want to make children feel
We don't
uncomfortable.
want. That's right.
Yeah. Baloney. Okay. It's not a laughing matter, but
Right.
I mean, so I feel like it's a cop out, because the discomfort has been felt by us as Black people
Sure.
with this history
Sure.
for decades
Yeah.
upon decades upon decades. So what, like the idea isn't, and they like to use the term indoctrination, which really is not what's happening at
Right,
all.
right,
It's like, to be able to learn the history, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
right.
Hopefully, it would teach us to not repeat that history.
Hopefully.
But unfortunately, if you sweep it under the rug or pretend like it doesn't exist, it's like what the kids call gaslighting. You familiar with that term? It's like,
Yep.
well, that's not really what happened. That's not the case. And they pretend like something doesn't
Yeah.
exist. It solves nothing.
Right.
It helps no one. It's not beneficial in any way whatsoever. And here's the thing. How is it being taught?
Well, that's often my question. So how is it being taught? I do think you need um, instructors, you need teachers who are knowledgeable,
Right.
right? Knowledgeable,
Right.
and not necessarily, and
And not political.
and not political, and not really trying to indoctrinate or polarize
Right.
students. I think that's important. I
Right.
do think that having the right person teach it is important, but I think it goes back to representation,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
You really need teachers of all different backgrounds, and we don't have that, in nationally. Teachers are overwhelmingly white, public school teachers, and I think private school teachers,
80%.
80%
Yep.
overwhelmingly white, and most of them are women, right? And so we know that. So then we know that there is some development
Mm-hmm.
that needs to happen around making sure that teachers kind of understand how to teach this.
Right.
That definitely is
Right.
important. But I agree with you. I think it's totally baloney in terms of like that argument around like you make kids feel bad.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so here's the thing, like, what is it that we're really afraid of? So I think behind these bans, if you will, is really fear. Like, what's the real fear that's there?
I think if people know their history, and people truly know their history, they're like unstoppable, right? And I think that's it. I think it's really sort of, the fear of, teaching Black kids about their history, about just how strong they are and how resilient and resourceful they are
Right.
and how incredible they are. I think there's a fear there. I mean,
Yeah.
I know one of the things about my family history is like um, how like the mechanical genius that exists in like my father and his brothers, and I see it in my brothers, and just throughout our family, and I love that. And there's something about that makes me think like I can take apart anything and put it together because this is part of what we do and who we are,
Sure.
right? There
Sure.
is a piece of that's that I know that is within me.
Right.
So I just have confidence in that area.
Mm-hmm.
Whether I can do it or not, remains to be seen. But I think once people know their history,
Mm-hmm.
right, they're unstoppable.
Right.
And I
Right.
think that's the fear.
Yeah, which is really sad,
It is sad. It
and
is.
disgusting
Mm-hmm.
at the same time. Because we're really, what we're really talking about is erasure,
Yeah. Yeah.
like erasing a group of people and erasing um, their history. And, what's interesting is that while they want to ban a lot of Black history or the history of indigenous people or Latin people of Latin descent, um, they want to keep in Asian history.
Mm-hmm.
I heard a woman talking about just that, and she was saying, there's also this narrative around Asian people being, the model
Minority.
race or the
Mm-hmm.
model
Mm-hmm.
minority, right? And ultimately, again, this is another act of division, but it's really not about elevating. It's the motives behind it are not pure. So it's
Mm-hmm.
not really about elevating, Asian history, or it's almost like using Asian people in a way that is, tokenizing them, and creating this narrative that really is not fair and equitable.
Right. Right.
And so it's like when you look at the example of a state like Florida, Florida is a horrible example of, diversity, equity, and inclusion. They are about exclusion.
Yes.
And, a lack of belonging. So much so that the NAACP has put out, a
Like almost an
like
advisory,
an
right?
advisory
Yeah.
against Black people traveling there. I even saw a report at a school in Florida with bins and bins of books that were under scrutiny. These books were like about all different races. They were about, some of them were really, really good books, books that you probably have taught in your English class. And all of those books were basically being thrown away, and the kids were not allowed to be exposed to those books in their schools, meaning the libraries had been washed out, classroom libraries. It's almost like they have to go underground to learn about the history of people of color in this country. And it's like, where are we? Like, it makes you wonder, like, is this supposed to be the land of the free?
Right. Right. I just can't, it is, even a year ago, this would have been unthinkable. Unthinkable. I just can't imagine in this space where, particularly, after the murder of George Floyd in 2020, there really was this explosion, right?
Yes. Which I think angered people.
Yes, and I think that's what happened, right? I think this is sort of the reaction to the need. People understood the need really for diversity, equity, and inclusion, particularly inclusion. Like they understood how other groups had been, particularly African Americans, had been excluded from these different areas. And I do think this is the response. This is part of the response.
Which is a bad response.
Yeah,
a horrific response.
Yes.
But this isn't the first time. There are other states, historically, that have, banned the history of, Latin Americans, in other states, out west or
and they've
south.
done it a lot through banning books. We've talked about this before, but a lot of books that have been banned really address the experiences of different groups. And so by banning these books, it's really this attempt
it's a story that doesn't get to be told.
That's right. It's an attempt to just squash the narrative. And so while they haven't come out and said, well, you can't teach this history, they've banned materials that would provide, insight and perspective into the history. So,
and they've banned courses. That's the other thing too. There are courses that are being banned as well and have been banned in some states. And there are political movements, against the history of people of color in our country, the land of the free. I'm going to say that again because it's not the land of the free when we're saying that there are groups of people whose story cannot be told in some states.
Kids can't learn about groups, those groups which you have represented in your state. Like,
exactly.
How could you do that? I'm just not.
Unbelievable
It is.
to me.
It really is.
Unbelievable.
It really is. It really is. And so, when we think about, sort of like the outcomes, right? Like, so to have kids that will not know their history, right? So you figure this is the law now,
and you think about Black history is American history.
It is American history. It is American history. So there's a whole section of American history that they are lopping off, right? And so then what happens? What happens to those kids who never really get to see themselves in history?
Right.
They don't really get to see themselves. Like, so what happened? How did how did my, group get here? How did we do this? What did we do? And I think it's unfathomable to think that, because you figure this is law now. right? So by the time he gets out of office, let's say somebody does come up and say, oh, we want to eradicate that law, whatever. We're really talking about a few years, right? In terms of,
Yeah.
you know, um,
Reversing things.
reversing that law.
Potentially.
Potentially.
You know,
Even,
if we're
and
lucky.
that's if you get somebody in there that says, we want to reverse this,
Right,
right?
right.
So, I mean, this could be years where, this state, the kids in that state are just not exposed to American history,
Right.
you know?
And also, the harm is not just for the students of color, the harm is for all students. Because now all students are not getting this
That's right.
exposure.
That's right.
All students are. So I remember, I think I may have mentioned this before, talking to a group of honored educators in our state who I was doing a session with them specifically related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And they were talking about, these were the majority of them, except for maybe one person in the room, were all white teachers. And they were talking about how they felt cheated, coming through school, not being able to learn about the history of other cultures and other ethnic groups. And they felt at a loss. And they also felt like, some of them didn't have exposure until they went to college. Just maybe a few weeks ago, I was talking to a young lady who does some research, and she was saying that she only learned about Jim Crow in college and had no idea about it. And so it's like, what you're doing is you're turning out a group of, individuals who have no idea about the history
Yeah.
of groups of people. And because you don't have any idea, then you don't understand their experience.
That's right. That's
It's
right.
easy for you to discriminate against them. It's easy for you to
Judge them, right? To judge them and to be totally okay
Right.
with not really understanding their
Right.
experiences, right? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. My
Excuse me.
brother, one of my brothers has a white wife, and one of the things that he said, he posted this on social media, and he said, because I guess they're both in their 50s now, and in that post he said, because the movie Till had recently come out, and he said, my wife has never heard of Emmett Till. Like, how do you get through years of schooling and life in this country and you've never heard of Emmett Till?
Wow.
I mean, that is like, for Black people in this country, like, that was like,
We all
we
knew about
all
Emmett
knew
Till.
about it.
I knew about Emmett Till as a child.
Yes.
I don't recall learning it in school, but it was either between family and church that we learned that
Yes.
history
Yes, we
and
did.
understood what was going on.
Yes.
Not to mention it came out in the Jet magazine.
That's right. That's right.
That was before
Yes.
my time, though.
Yes.
That was before my time.
Well, I
But-
mean, I think that's the point, though. Like, so that happened really before we were both born.
Right.
And we still knew about it.
we absolutely knew
We
about it.
still knew about it. And if somebody referenced
understood
Emmett
the
Till,
significance of
that's
it.
right.
Right.
That's right. We
Right.
understood the context, and I mean, so it's like this experience. We've talked about this before, but they really are like, it's a different experience. It's such a different country being Black in this country than it is being white. Like, there are just things that white people just don't know.
Yes.
And the idea that Emmett Till, like, they wouldn't know about the Emmett Till murder is just, that was astounding to me. Like, when I read that post, like, wow. So, but I think we're going to have more of that if we continue with this.
If this continues to be acceptable.
Yes.
But I really think that there's an opportunity for people to rise up, and there could be a movement to really address, this, these bans, and
Yes.
like, imagine if the voices of those who are being marginalized rose.
Well, that's what and I like that you talked about opportunity, because that's really what I was thinking. Like, from this, right, there will be hopefully African American residents that say, I'm going to run for office, or allies that
Right.
say, this is unacceptable.
Exactly.
I'm going to run for office.
Right.
Right. I'm going
Right.
to,
Because that's the key.
that's the key.
Right.
That
It's really
is.
about who's. So the reason why a state like Florida can pass these laws that are against groups of people is because there are some people in office who've been voted into office who are perpetuating this. And there are movements currently where they, if they put people with this mindset into office, then they can change the landscape of communities and society at large. And so, just like those movements are happening, we need to have movements where we stand up collectively and say, this is unacceptable.
It's unacceptable. That's right.
This is a country that is full of diversity. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of different ethnic and racial groups in this country. And many of them have a history. And it's important that we know and learn and understand that history.
Right.
I mean, it took, my learning. There's so many people, so many different people's history that I just did not know about coming up, and learned about them as an adult because I wasn't exposed to them. And it's like, oh, wait, I didn't know that this group went through this, this type of marginalization.
Yes.
That's
so funny that you say that, because I same thing in college. It's like, wow, all this different information. And I think because of that, like, I'm just such a documentary watcher. Like, I love documentaries, especially when it's about like different groups and what they've, but I think you're right, though. I think it's, and I wondered to myself, like, why didn't I learn this, right? Why wasn't this part of, any part of American history 1 or 2 that I had in high school? And so, but I do think even sort of whetting the appetite for kids to, it's like, okay, so maybe we have to sort of pick and choose what we teach about, but whetting the appetite for them to be lifelong learners. Like, I want to learn about that group. Like, I want to know what their experiences are, right? But I think when you don't do that, when you sort of like whitewash the history, like, everything's good, and not really talk about like the struggles, like the human struggles,
and we're doing a disservice.
We're doing a disservice.
Disservice.
Yes, we are. Yes, we are.
The more that I think about this, I mean, it like I said, it saddens me. It also disgusts me, but it also angers me, and I just really want to encourage those who are listening to really think about, where, might you have voice? Where might you have influence?
That's really good.
What might you be able to do to change the landscape for all children, quite honestly? Because every child deserves to see themselves in the curriculum. Every child deserves to learn about all groups of people, because we don't live in a country that's not diverse.
That's true.
So,
that's right.
We've got to stand up, people. We've got to stand up, and we've got to speak up and speak out. We've got to vote.
Yep.
We've got to vote the people in office who are not trying to stifle and whitewash or erase the history of groups of people. We've got to stand up and do something. And if we don't do that now,
if we don't do it,
we're in a bad place.
There will be more and more acts like this.
That's right.
Where we marginalize people, we erase histories, and we send a very clear message that you don't matter.
Right. That's right.
Right?
That's right.
And how and that you're insignificant. And it is our responsibility. It is our responsibility to use our collective
responsibility.
It is our responsibility to use our voice.
Right.
Either as members of that group or as allies.
That's correct.
And so
what are you going to do?
So what are you going to do?
That's our question to you. What are you going to do?
Yeah.
Really think about that and take some action. So we're glad you joined us today. We're glad that you were part of this conversation. We really want to hear what you're going to do.
So I'm Erika.
And I'm Tonya. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.